Okay, thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our October Public Health Preparedness webinar. We have a really great speaker with us tonight, and I just want to make a couple quick announcements before I introduce him. I just want to get started by, I know I've told some people this, so if you've heard it already, I apologize, but our Emergency Management Club here at Penn State is now officially official. So we have a Penn State webpage, and we are able to post all of our meetings on there. So we are having a meeting next Tuesday. We're going to try to keep to a schedule where it's the second Tuesday of the month. It's going to be 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, 7 p.m. for our Central Time friends. But we are we have a couple officers, and we're going to continue like we did last year. We're going to have guest speakers and bring them in. We're going to work with people who want to get their CEM or their AEM. We've had two people, myself included, who did get their CEM so very recently, like within the past year. So we are more than happy to work with you through the process, explain like how we did it, walk you through the packet, all those kind of good things. So we are definitely here as resources. So we would love to see you. If you have not seen any information on the club and you're interested, please feel free to shoot me an email, and I am putting my email in the chat right now, so I can add you to the roster, and that way you'll get all the information. Second announcement is going to be that our PHP webinar is always the first Wednesday of the month during the academic year. So the next one is going to be November 6th, again at 8 o'clock Eastern time. And next month we're having somebody, a Coast Guard captain, come in who's going to talk about leadership and mental health. And he wrote a really interesting book on intrusive leadership, and he's a really great speaker. He's flying all over the country for the Coast Guard giving this. So I'm going to be getting that information out to you soon. Now I would like to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. On a personal note, I've known Keith for a really long time now. We met about 14 years ago in our PhD program, and I started a year before him. He might have finished first, but I'm gonna blame it on the fact I had a baby in the middle of it. But I remember at the beginning of my program, they were talking all about study groups and using other students and making those connections and studying together and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, yeah, sure, sounds great. It's all right, I got this. So then we actually got into the program, and I don't know if Keith adopted me or how that worked, but we ended up going through our program together, and we ended up reading each other's dissertation tons of times. I joke that we just should have co-written 2 dissertations instead of writing 2 independent ones because of the number of times that we went back and forth. So I now refer to, when I'm trying to describe him to people and about how, best practices for PhD programs and grad programs, I call him my academic big brother. So that is he has a much more distinguished bio than that, as I'll read. But for the past 14 years, we've been in this world, this Homeland Security, biodefense world together. So he's got a lot of great insight. So I'm excited to have him here tonight. So he's a retired special agent of the FBI. He started his professional career as an Air Force officer. He was a pilot. And then he spent 23 years as a special agent in the FBI conducting counterintelligence and counterterrorism investigations. He finished his career specializing in technical support to all investigative programs. He is an associate professor at American Military University and primarily teaches doctoral courses for the Doctorate of Strategic Intelligence program. His teaching and publishing center around intelligence, cyber policy, terrorism, and homeland security. He also has a co-publication on societal security and COVID, and I know that for a fact because we co-wrote it together, and so that was a lot of fun. He's won a number of awards for the FBI and academic awards, and he has a BS in computer science, an MA in strategic studies, homeland security from the Naval Postgraduate School, an MS in cybersecurity from AMU, and a PhD in biodefense from George Mason. He's also a licensed Florida public investigator, and he owns president CEO of the Ludwick Agency, married with 2 children. And he is going to be speaking with us tonight about medical intelligence. So Keith, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction. Yes, Jennifer and I do go way back, and I've enjoyed working with her. And I guess I should also throw her a bone, is that she got me my job at American Military University when she left to go work at Penn State. So I slid into her slot. It's amazing. It's kind of nepotistic if you really want to know about the real world of academia. I'll start with a joke. Do you know how you could tell a pilot? They'll tell you.
Many times.
Many times. Yeah. So yeah, I always got to throw my joke in there. Yeah. So Air Force, FBI. I'm not going to go into that. I'll go into a little bit more about the AMU. We have a doctorate in strategic intelligence program. I teach exclusively there. So I'm on 20 something dissertation committees. All of the students are studying things from cyber and artificial intelligence to domestic terrorism, all these different things. And I teach a lot of the intelligence courses and a lot of the technology courses. Jennifer and I, and this kind of leads into my presentation, we're talking one day, and we had just started a course at AMU called Medical Intelligence, and it was just written about 6 months ago. And I helped co-write this course with another professor. And so as I was going through this course, it was kind of hard to write, because we were always asking the question, what is medical intelligence and where does it apply? We're in an intelligence program in the school. And in our world, in my department, we don't have a lot of public health. But Jennifer always drags me over into the public health side, saying, don't forget about us, don't forget about us. And so Jennifer and I decided to write a paper about this medical intelligence and this lack of direction and definition. So the presentation I have today is loosely based on this paper, which is not completed. So don't expect any answers, right? You're not going to get any answers about anything. And I'm also very open to more of a discussion based. I don't have any slides, so I'm just going to ramble on, and just interrupt if you have a question or you want to say something or have a comment or a question. So
I'm just going to interrupt real quickly. If you do have a question and you don't want to or can't use your mic, I'll be monitoring the chat. So just type it in there and I can interrupt for you.
Yeah. All right. So I know that this is pretty much a public health program, and most of you probably have some sort of homeland security or some sort of background. You probably have some rudimentary understanding of what intelligence is, but I think it's good just to talk about intelligence in general to get a baseline. So what is intelligence? Well, the grandfather of intelligence writing is Lowenthal, and we always fall back to what Mark says. And then basically, and if I'm looking over here, it's because that's where my notes are, is information is processed somehow and then becomes actionable or useful. That's intelligence. So what is that? What does that mean? And it's often situational. And I have some examples here. So let's imagine that Russia put 100,000 troops on the border of Ukraine, right? That's information. But is that actionable? Well, it could be. It depends, right? It's complicated. It's like Facebook. It's complicated. We don't know. But it's how you use that and how that information is processed. So if you have 100,000 troops on the border of Ukraine and you combine that with human intelligence somewhere else that is corroborating that with intent, because there's a difference between capability and intent, then it could become intelligence that, oh, maybe they are going to invade Ukraine. But if you just have a satellite image that says there's 100,000 troops there, honestly, that's just raw information and you can't do anything with it. Same thing, and I'll put this in the public health context. You have 10 people that have Ebola in New York. Is that intelligence or is that information? When you put that in context, right? If you just saw in the news that 10 people got Ebola in New York, that's just information. You might want to do something with it, and you're going to maybe raise some flags and you're going to deploy people to help, but you can't do anything with that information. But however, if you had 100 cases of Ebola in Dallas, and then you have 10 cases of Ebola in New York, now that might be intelligence, because now you're looking at the fact that, oh, people are moving, migrating, this pandemic or epidemic might be spreading, that kind of thing. But a lot of times people don't think about this, is that we, in the intelligence world, we think about business intelligence. And don't worry, I'm all going to bring this back to medical intelligence, but we have to have a baseline. So if Coca-Cola just signed a contract with XYZ movie theaters to put Coca-Cola products in that could be information, and anybody can have access to it. You walk into the movie theater, there's Coke, right? That's information. But if you're Pepsi, now all of a sudden that might be intelligence, right? That's business intelligence. That's competitive intelligence. You're going to try and figure out, what can I do with that to try and get a bigger market share? Am I going to go over a different movie theater, or maybe I'm going to undercut Coca-Cola? Whatever. I'm not a business guy, but you get the picture there. So that's kind of what we think about when we define what do we mean by intelligence. But there's also some historical context. And again, this is all pertinent. I'm getting there, right? But the history of intelligence is like, it's 5,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. Intelligence was basically human intelligence. You just had spies. That's all we had back then. And usually it was all military. It was to overthrow the king or overthrow the queen, or right, get more land, or we're going to take over this country or whatever. That's all the intelligence was you're getting information. Kings, queens, leaders, generals, they would take that information, try to make it actionable so that they could pursue their military action or whatever they were trying to do. Even in biblical times, they talk about spies in the Bible. The Egyptians had spies. We're all should be familiar. George Washington, right? The Cooper ring he used to spy on the British. And a lot of historians credit the Revolutionary War would not have been won if it hadn't been for the use of spies. Balloons, one of the first aerial surveillances used in the Civil War. They were using balloons to monitor troop movements. So now, why is that important? Because now we're getting beyond human intelligence, and we're starting to look at other things where, although they weren't really taking pictures, but you could call that imagery intelligence. It was the grandfather of imagery intelligence. But intelligence really came to its ahead in World War II. And we could spend hours and hours talking about that. But most noteworthy is Operation Overlord. The invasion of Normandy would have never happened or been successful if it hadn't been for the massive intelligence and counterintelligence activities that were going on to gather information about troop movements and deception operations and all of that stuff, so that the Germans would think that we were actually going to invade in Calais when we didn't. But business intelligence, we talked about Coca-Cola. Business intelligence is generally thought to start around 1865 with a banker who started sneaking around to other banks and stealing their customer lists and then undercutting them and inviting them over. And he is pretty much, Mr. Devins is considered the father of business intelligence. And I just think that's so cool. So that's why I said that, right? Whatever. But the thing that I really want to, and now I'm going to get honing in, and I'm going to use a medical kind of story, analogy, metaphor, I don't know, whatever you call it, to illustrate this is, 100 years ago, 75 years ago, you had a doctor. And if you were going to have a baby, or you broke your arm, you needed a tooth pulled, right? Whatever, you had a cold, you went to see the doctor. But then what happened? You started getting specialists. You started having people who are specialized in gynecologists, in OBGYNs, delivering babies. And then you might have cancer doctors, or you would have general practitioners versus surgeons. And you started specializing in that. Well, I have a friend, and I love this, right? I have a friend, he's a doctor, but he's not a doctor, he's a radiologist. So he specializes in reading MRIs, X-rays, those kinds of things. But no, he's not just a radiologist. He specializes in pediatric radiology. So he just looks at kids. No, wait, he didn't stop there. He's a pediatric radiologist who specializes in wrists and ankles. How specialized is that, right? Can he do the other work? Sure. But I tease him all the time. Like, when are you going to stop at just the right thumb, right? That you're going to be that specialized. Intelligence has taken the same track, and there's more and more specialties. And most people generally believe that the beginning of intelligence was human sources. You would go and get somebody to spill their guts, whether it was through torture or just good old fashioned trying to get the good side of them. That was human intelligence. And then we started talking about imagery intelligence. And in World War II, they started having airplanes that would take pictures overhead. And then you'd have people that were interpreting those phone calls. I'm sorry, my phone just rang. Interpreting those pictures. And then we had signals intelligence, where you started looking at radio waves and electromagnetic waves, and you were starting to look at radar waves and interpreting them and using that information and turning that into intelligence. Then we had MEDINT, and we're getting more and more specialized. And MEDINT is stuff like, it's called measurement and I've slipped my mind. But basically, you're looking at things like taking airborne readings during the Cold War to see if they were doing nuclear testing, or having sensors to see if the ground was vibrating at some level, and that's MEDINT. And then we got into OSINT, open source intelligence, and then we even specialized that to get into SOCINT, which is social media intelligence. And I bring all of that up because this is all leading to medical intelligence. And that's kind of where we're kind of looking at this now as another specialty. But there's a problem, and we're going to get to that. But very briefly, I'm going to preach to the choir. Let's compare that with the public health history very briefly, because most of you probably know this way better than I do. But they called the 1800s the Great Sanitary Awakening. That's when people... Excuse me for a second. So they call that the Great Sanitary Awakening. And that's when people started to come alive about being cleanliness, and you all know that. In the late 1800s, bacteriology started taking over. Earliest 20th century is when there was a move more towards personal care. And then in the 70s was the explosion of spending on public health. And the big red flag there was AIDS. And I think that's important because when we start talking about intelligence, it was in the 70s as well that it was starting to become more specialized and more relevant, and spending in both of those things kind of came up around the same time. So let's say, what is medical intelligence? Well, depends on who you ask. And this is what makes this such a big problem, is that if you ask somebody from public health, then Dahl says, and I'm reading, public health surveillance typically means the systematic collection and analysis of data, information, concerning infectious diseases, but it can also be used to track other health issues, including chronic diseases. Now, public health surveillance, that's a form of intelligence. But the military thinks of something different, right? And this is defined by NATO. Medical intelligence is an intelligence rather than a medical function, and may be operationalized for the benefit of strategic interests. Well, that's a little different, right? Or how about medical intelligence is usually defined as a form of intelligence derived from medical, biological, and other health-related information. It therefore stands out from most other categories of intelligence, which are defined by the modality of information, rather than being the subject specific. In the formulation of the Department of Defense, medical intelligence entails the collection, evaluation, analysis, and interpretation of foreign medical, bioscientific, and environmental information that is interest to strategic planning. So now we've got this dichotomy, because well, it's actually a trichotomy, I guess, not a dichotomy, is that you've got public health that says, hey, we're using intelligence, medical intelligence to help stop the spread of disease for whatever group. But you've got the military that basically says, no, 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 we're using it for operational needs, not for medical. What was the function? Not a medical function. Those things are opposed to each other. So the problem that we're having now is you're starting to get organizations that are kind of drawing these lines in the sand. I mean, doctors, we all know doctors have this do no harm. We don't do that. And yet, if you have information that you're going to use to save lives, but could potentially cost lives, how do you reconcile that? And I'll try and get some engagement here. Does anybody remember a recent case where that was actually prevalent? Anyone? How about the doctor that was issuing vaccines to the Pakistani village where Osama bin Laden was? So now you have a doctor who is issuing vaccines, polio, to help kids. But what he was doing is when he issued the nurses were issuing the vaccines, they were drawing out a drop of blood after the vaccine was given. And they were trying to find the children of Osama bin Laden because they knew he would never be separated from his children. And if they found the children, then they knew he was in that village. So now you've got this kind of competing interest with this. Medical intelligence is, as a military function, is normally thought to have started before World War II when the army was thinking about getting involved. When they saw Hitler doing all those shenanigans in the mid to late 30s, they said, uh-oh, we're going to get involved whether we want to or not. And they started a unit in the army that started examining medical situations of foreign troops. Things like, is there the flu going through the troops? Obviously, we all know troops are, they're in close quarters. There's a lot of communicable diseases. It's not the cleanest environment. So they were monitoring all of this to see if they could use that information to help the Allies and the British. And there is information that prior to the US entering World War II, the United States was feeding information to the British about the general health of the German army. So is that medical intelligence? Is it intelligence? I told you we weren't going to have a lot of answers here. So there you go, right? During the war, there were cadre of people in the army and the Navy and military services of the Allies that when they captured enemy medical personnel, they were debriefed on enemy health. What were their sanitary conditions? What were they doing to defeat these diseases? Where were they using basic cleanliness, washing their hands? Where were their toilets located? They were asking those types of questions so that they would know the impact of the soldiers, of the Nazi soldiers. After the war, the CIA kind of took that over, and the Cold War became this kind of hotbed of medical intelligence because they wanted to know the health of the Soviet population. There were things that were determined that there were various epidemics going through the Soviet Union in various places, and the US was actively working to prevent the distribution of vaccines to some of those diseases because they wanted the population to be frustrated and sick. Now, things like the flu, normally they're not deadly, so it's still bad. I'm not justifying it, but they weren't killing people. I'm sure some people died. But the idea here is that the population of the Soviet Union, of course, would be more sick, wouldn't be able to work, they're not producing, and it was going to generally cause some problems for the Soviet Union. But then after the Cold War started to crumble in the 80s, medical intelligence started shifting more towards the preventative and what you as public health professionals would think of as medical intelligence, more along the lines of not a national security issue, but public health was becoming more prevalent and stronger. And this kind of dovetails with what I talked about in the history there a little bit of the spending and public health just exploding as an institution and as part of governments in the 70s and 80s. And I think from an organizational perspective, good or bad and indifferent, the public health got stronger and their funding got stronger. They became more educated. They got better leaders and more evidence behind them, which convinced people. And plus, the Cold War was dying off. We thought, oh, there's a peace dividend, right? No more bad people. So let's spend it on helping on our own. Now, in 2008, the military centralized its medical intelligence function, and they called it the National Center for Medical Intelligence. It's supposed to be kind of an all-discipline military approach. It's supposed to be regardless of the various services. And they're actually supposed to be split between kind of a national security type of function and a military support to the civilian world type of function. They don't do active work like public health does. It's more of a pipeline of information to them. So that's kind of, it boils down to, we still don't know what it is. And we don't understand how we're supposed to incorporate these two kind of separate elements. You have this element of national security, which is oftentimes militaristic, which arguably is to prepare to kill people. I mean, let's be blunt, that's simplistic, but that's kind of what they're supposed to do. And then you have this public health element that is basically trying to save people, regardless of whose side they're on. Doesn't matter, we just want to save people. And there are some dichotomies and some conflicts there that we're starting to see in organizational structures. So, what does all this mean for the future? Well, this is all my personal assessment right now. I haven't finished this paper. Jennifer and I are going to polish it here someday when we get around to it. But if we already know that various elements of the US government aren't sharing information, what makes us think that the US government is going to share information across DoD versus CDC versus NIH and all of these different organizations? We're already struggling just between the FBI and the CIA, and we're struggling between the CIA and the DoD and DHS. Like, it's just worse. It's more of a problem. And here's some specific examples that I just cooked up. I'm sure we can poke some holes in these, but just go with me, right? What happens if the CDC picks up through their medical intelligence and medical surveillance that there's a plague outbreak in an island in the Aral Sea, which happens to be where the USSR did their bioweapons research back in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. So if the CDC picks up on this, is their responsibility a national security responsibility? Or is it more of a global health responsibility? Or is it more of a US health responsibility? And I don't think we really have a lot of answers to that question. If the military or the CIA picks up on an outbreak of malaria in Iraq, Syria, among its ISIS members, what do? There's a sworn enemy of the US. Malaria is very prevalent in Iraq and Syria. Should the CIA report that? I don't know. I mean, these are our sworn enemies. Again, if you're a doctor, you're probably thinking along the lines of, well, we help people. That's what we do, regardless. We got to help people. But we know that ISIS is a national security threat. So how do you resolve that? Should intelligence assets like human sources that are very well placed or satellites that are super secret, should these intelligence assets traditionally used to discover military and diplomatic information and intelligence, be used to develop public health information to help spread prevent the spread of diseases. But what if revealing that information reveals your source? So if you have a source, okay, I'm totally making this up. I'm going to make this up. Nobody write this down. Let's say we had a human source that reported that COVID did originate out of a lab in Wuhan, right? If we had a human source, but that source was so well placed that if that information got out, we would compromise that source. Would you release that information? I don't know. Should public health assets be used to develop military intelligence, such as the vaccine program we talked about with bin Laden? So how do you integrate these concepts? Should there be differing definitions that help, separate these out? And I think I see a lot of this. To me, I see this pattern. We saw this in the study of terrorism. And that's what I wrote my dissertation on, specifically lone wolf terrorism. And, in 1985, 1995, we didn't understand what terrorism was. We didn't have a definition. People were arguing all the time. The government, the academics, the news media, nobody would agree with what it was. But over time, this definition kind of narrowed. And although there's no date you can put in a calendar, around 2015-ish, the academic literature finally said, okay, I think we've defined it now. And this is what it is. This is what terrorism is. And where we are with medical intelligence is right there. We're early there, like the early studies of terrorism, is we don't know what it is yet. And we don't know how this is going to work out. And there's an academic side of this where we need to work to define it, but there's an operational and practical side as well, where we need to figure out how we're going to use it. Are we going to put in guardrails, and rules about this type of information? So that's pretty much what I have. Like I said, sometimes academics relate to the game. I would agree with that. But I was hoping at this point that maybe I would engage in a little bit of conversation about this, about how you as public health professionals or budding public health professionals felt about this. Obviously, my presentation kind of skewed more intelligence, military type, thinking. That's my background, but I'm cognizant that that's not the only issue here. Jeff looks like he's going to jump in and say something. I'm waiting.
Sources of medical intelligence, of the data sources. Where are good sources?
Well, I think it goes back to what we're talking about. What are you using it for, right? So sources can be anything. We've had instances of imagery intelligence showing mass areas of diasporas where people are congregated in these kind of tent cities with poor sanitation and stuff like that. So if it's a military or intelligence asset that's looking at that, do they share that information with the World Health Organization? But by the same token, they're now, tipping their hand that they have this asset to count people that are doing that. Sources of information, and as I'm thinking about this and we're talking about it, you realize that there's this kind of two ways. It goes both ways. Do we have this military information that we can turn into public health intelligence? We'll call it that, public health intelligence, right? We have this military intelligence information we can turn into public health information and intelligence, or we can have it the other way around, where you have public health intelligence information that could be used by the military or the diplomatic or traditional intelligence.
I have a quick question if I don't see any other hands up. So You were talking about how the intel field has kind of developed and how other kinds of intelligence, like social media intelligence and medical intelligence, are kind of like the new kids on the block. Um, how does the intelligence, I know like people that I've met in the intel world, they can be kind of old school and kind of grounded in like what works. So how are newer fields like medical intelligence regarded in the bigger intel world and within the IC?
I might, that's a good question. I think you're right that most people, and it's like anything, it's not intelligence, right? It's, you could be a pilot, you could be an FBI agent, right? You could be a coastie, you could whatever. And there's always going to be something where you're like, well, that's stupid. Why are we doing it that way now? It always worked back then, right? That's kind of that's the nature of growth and organizational growth and personal growth. And when social media intelligence first kind of cracked its ugly head in like 2011, 2012, 2013, something like that, all the people were like, no, that's stupid. It's just part of OSINT. Why would you carve it out? It's all the same thing. But what happened is you developed these analysts that's all they did was social media, and that they learned the techniques and the logins and the lingo and the language and the culture of LinkedIn versus Facebook versus Instagram, or even and so they specialized in it, and they're the ones that kind of planted the flag. And if I had to guess, I would say the same thing's going to happen with medical intelligence, is that people like me are asking all these questions like, what the hell is it? We don't even really know what it is. But sooner or later, somebody's going to kind of specialize in this and make this their own, and they're going to be good at it. And then all of a sudden, they're going to put a flag in the ground and go, okay, now this is it. And it'll be up to us, academics. Somebody in the chat, I forget who, but they're like, oh, we're always late to the game. And you're right. I agree with that 100%. But I don't know if that answered your question. It's kind of rambling.
No. And I think that, like the Military Intelligence Center that was established, it helps kind of plant that flag. But no, yeah, that's interesting. You did answer it. Thank you. And it looks like Gene, who said that we were late to the game, has his hand up. Gene, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks. And I think Chris wants to too. So I'll be quick with this question, but maybe come back later. So do you include animal disease surveillance and pharmaceutical surveillance as well in your definition? So we can talk about some of these, highly infectious, communicable, infectious animal diseases, hoof and mouth, for example. Do you consider that part of medical intelligence, and then pharmaceuticals too? Whereas we learned from COVID, many of our pharmaceuticals are not made in this country.
Right. No, I'm going to go yes and no, yes and no. There you go. That's a great academic answer. Yes and no. Medical intelligence, I've forgotten all of the details. And if somebody did remembers, please correct me or jump in. But wasn't it during World War I that they killed a bunch of horses using some zoonotic disease or something, and they wiped out a bunch of the cavalry or something like that? So that would, to me, be an instance, and I have some of those details wrong, I forget, but I would include, yes, I would include maybe veterinary medicine as part of medical intelligence. And I would say that goes both ways. Like I said, you've got public health looking at these veterinary issues and these zoonotic issues. That information can be used for a military perspective, and that would be included, I think. I would. But then the same way, you could have the military intelligence saying, hey, let's take out all their horses, because then they can't plow their fields and they're going to die. And we won't be accused of killing humans. We're just going to kill the horses, and nobody cares about those except for horse lovers, and we'll be great, right? So yes. As far as the pharmaceuticals, I pondered that. I actually have a couple of little notes here on my screen about that. And I was thinking in terms of business intelligence. For instance, if a big, huge pharmaceutical company is starting to do research and finds out that, like I just read an article in the news today that there's a bunch of increase in the number of cancers for young people. And if a pharmaceutical company uses that information to try and develop drugs, they're like, okay, we're going to put our eggs in this basket to help solve cancer because we see that's increasing. Is that business intelligence or is that medical intelligence? I don't know. It's kind of that's one of those things. But then again, and I think this is exactly what you were kind of alluding to more specifically, was pharmaceutical companies overseas have the possibility of withholding, maybe ruining, disrupting supply chains for needed drugs. Would that be medical intelligence? And I would say yes. I would say that would be intelligence. I don't know if that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, I was hoping you were going to say that. That just makes it a harder thing to define, though, when you add those couple of things and other.
No, and those are excellent points. I obviously didn't talk about that, and thank you for helping add to my paper. So I will definitely cover that. I think, Chris, did you have a question?
Chris, you go, and then I have one from the chat.
Great, thank you. I just kind of wanted to extend out a little bit of what Jean had commented on. So I guess I have two questions, so I apologize. I'm a faculty member at Penn State Harrisburg and graduate faculty at University Park, and I am in the Homeland Security department at PSU Harrisburg. And one of the areas that I cover and that I spent a good part of my career in the Balkans, in the Western Balkans, working with NATO, the U.S. mission to NATO. And my principal area is critical infrastructure protection. So basically the 16 sectors that CISA, the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Administration, covers inside the United States. So I'm going back to the United States here a little bit, but a lot of what I've learned about the United States was informed by my work in places like Kosovo, Albania, North Macedonia, Montenegro. So my question really has to do with, when I teach and do my research on CIP, on critical infrastructure protection, the public health sector is, I would say, the most vulnerable of all the 16. And a lot of it has to do with getting at medical technology, laboratory work, intellectual property, HIPAA data to cause reputational damage against, I guess it could be anyone, businesses, group. Well, in this case, I guess HIPAA would be citizens, individuals, and that is, very sensitive information. So what I was wondering is, does medical intelligence, and I see many parallels with other disciplines, and I know you covered the various intelligence disciplines, but does medical intelligence also cover critical infrastructure protection, protecting those assets against a foreign threat actor seeking to penetrate a hospital or a research lab or a university where the vulnerabilities to exploit are really, really present? So I'm just I wanted to pick your brain on that sector specific kind of question. My other question is more about process. If you think if there should be an intelligence agency added to the IC, to the intelligence community, but I'm really interested in that critical infrastructure piece.
That's a very interesting question. I guess you might package it in another way. And here's the way I might package it is, you're talking about critical infrastructure, and we have airplanes that overfly nuclear power plants to see and take pictures to see if there's any vulnerabilities. And they're looking to make sure the fence is intact, or their tree lines need to be cut back so they can, all that kind of stuff. So the question would be, is that critical infrastructure intelligence, or is that traditional imagery intelligence being used to protect critical infrastructure, right? It's kind of a chicken or the egg type of question. And I might say the same thing about the healthcare sector. If you're using HUMINT, you have spies that you have in China, Russia, Iran, and wherever to say, do you know, is Russia or Iran targeting the public health sector? Is that medical intelligence? I would probably say no. No, that's human intelligence, right? You're using human intelligence to find out if something's being targeted. So here's an extreme example. Just it's a silly example, but it might help. Is if we had people that could have told us that they were going to fly airplanes into 9/11, would that have been building intelligence? No, it wouldn't have been, right? It was human intelligence. So in those regards, I would say that protecting public health sector falls normally in line with regular intelligence collection. Medical intelligence, I think, centers on the use of medical information to do something. And so you're using medical information and processing it to turn it into intelligence to get a military advantage, maybe a diplomatic advantage, or if we're looking at it from the public health side, we're using it to get information to stop the spread of a disease or from killing animals. So I don't, I'll have to think about that more, but on the surface, I think I'm going to argue that no, public health sector, and I'm not arguing that it is not the most important. It's probably one of the top 2 or 3, I would say, sectors of the critical CIP. You're shaking your head. You're like, no, it's the most important one. I could see him. He's frustrated, but that's okay, right? We can disagree. I'd have to kind of think about that, but I don't think there's that targeting and protecting of a sector is an intelligence. So if we look at the defense industrial base, that's a critical sector, right? Do we have an intelligence that we call defense intelligence basin, right? No, we don't. We use traditional intelligence to help protect that and prevent that from being compromised and protected. And then I guess to I love your comments. Like, you agree with that, or what do you think?
Oh, no, I do agree with that, because I'm always, well, one of the questions I always get asked is, do we define intelligence disciplines, the process, or even national security too broadly? Like, is everything a security concern? And if everything is a security concern, what is not a security concern? I think a lot of that has to do with the propensity to define intelligence and security too broadly is to align oneself with either DoD or an intelligence agency which has greater budgetary dollars than other agencies. So I think bureaucratic politics gets in the way. But so basically what I'm hearing is that critical infrastructure, even though it's the health sector, is a little bit distinct from the utilization of medical intelligence, which is informed by all the, I don't want to say classic disciplines, but the intelligence disciplines that are recognized, that are out there, everything from OSINT to HUMINT, and we know HUMINT is incredibly resource heavy, right? And so we rely on SIGINT and IMINT and all these other disciplines. So no, I kind of want, I liked your response and agree with what you had said, because I do think there is a propensity to define things a little bit too wide in many ways.
I'll give you a non-health example. Obviously, she said, and I'm a retired FBI agent, and I was in the FBI when they started the cyber division, right? So there was a big hack, and that's when the Congress said, you need a cyber division in the FBI. And there were a lot of us that were like, no, we don't. We don't, because think of it this way, the FBI is organized, right? We have a criminal division that handles all criminal activity. And we have a counterintelligence division that handles all intelligence, counterintelligence, and a terrorism division, right? But if you think about cyber can be a victim of a crime. So I hack into Penn State's computer and take down your emails, then you've just been victimized. And I've used it, but cyber could also be like the perpetrator, where you develop bots to go and do things to other people's computers. And then it can also be the venue of a crime. Like, so if your computer, if I reach in, take your account information and then steal your bank account, the cyber was the venue, right? Well, think about a bank. The bank can be a victim of a crime. You can rob a bank. It can be the venue of a crime. You can murder somebody in a bank, right? Or it can be the perpetrator of the crime, meaning the bank could defraud other people. But we don't have a bank division in the FBI. Why would you have a bank division? That's stupid, right? It's handled on the criminal division. And I think that little stupid example applies here to the public health sector. Is we have to be careful, because it goes to your point. It's too broad, and intelligence is too broad, and we must be careful, I think, as we move forward to try and narrow this down. And I'm starting this conversation, been very helpful to me, because I'm starting to think that maybe it should be medical intelligence and public health intelligence, and that will help us define this going forward. And it takes time, and the definitions have to get traction, and other people have to adopt it. You know how it works in academia, right? And then hopefully 10 years from now, people are like, okay, well, we kind of got that settled. Let's go on and find another problem. All right. I mean, I totally forgot you had a second question. I think.
Oh yeah,
Actually,
I don't want to take up
sorry.
too much time, but yeah, it was whether or not you thought another agency needed to be added to the IC.
No.
Okay, good.
No more agencies ever. No. Done. Next question. No.
Okay.
Oh, I'm done. I'm done.
I have 3 that came in the chat, and none of them have to do with adding more to the IC, so we should be good. This is piggybacking off of the social media aspect, but how has the advent of the dark web contributed to medical intelligence?
Wow. I have to think about that one. The dark web. Well, I think and these are stretches, so take it for what it's worth. Don't anybody take notes on this. I'm just kind of going off the seat of my pants here. But let's say we notice that a bunch of people are selling kidneys out of Cambodia, right? Is that medical intelligence or public health intelligence? And I would argue it might be both. If you see medical, people offering cheap medical services for whatever, to people over the dark web that would be illegal under most circumstances, then, or maybe by unlicensed doctors, could that lead to the development of military or civilian or diplomatic intelligence that would aid the United States and national security? Yeah, I think if you put that in context with other types of information and processed it, then yeah, it could be. But it could also be public health information, because it's telling you that there's this lack of quality medical care, or the lack of regulation for medical care in certain areas. Maybe the same thing could be applied to the availability of drugs, especially if it was like prescription drugs or specialized drugs. I'm not talking about like crack and marijuana, but like specialized drugs that are being sold on the black market on the dark web. Could medical intelligence help in those capacities? And I would say yes. One thing we didn't talk about at all, and it was in a little abstract, I just didn't put it in because I couldn't have time or whatever, is how about medical intelligence when it relates to criminal work, right? We talk about intelligence as it relates to law enforcement. And as a law enforcement officer, I used counterintelligence, classified traditional spy work, but I also used criminal intelligence that was publicly available information to discern movements of gangs and what they were going to do and all this type of information. So maybe the dark web would be more of interest to medical intelligence to a law enforcement perspective. I don't know if that kind of answers the question. You guys are asking for answers, and I started the whole thing by saying I don't have the answer.
Asking for your thoughts.
Yeah.
So It's 8:58. I still have a couple questions in the chat. So Keith, are you still good hanging out for a little bit? Okay. If you've got questions, put them in the chat. We'll just keep going until we're all done. So similar question to one of the ones that you answered before, but do you see medical intelligence being more used for national security or national health?
I think it depends. It depends on where you sit, right? If you're sitting in the CIA or in the DoD, it's 99%. Okay, maybe 95% national security. You know, we still have USAMRIID and they do their stuff. And I know they're talking to the CDC and all those other organizations and what we say the right thing for the global community. But if you're in DoD and you're in the intelligence section portion of the DoD, it's all about the warfighter, right? That's your mission. That's it. I mean, I tease Jennifer all the time because this Coast Guard kind of has this weird, mushy kind of, well, we are a military branch, but we don't do any military stuff unless we're at war, and then we do military stuff. And
We
right,
do military stuff all the time on
and
top
then you
of
do
everything
law
else that we
enforcement stuff,
do.
right? So I think in some ways that's the same type of situation. If you're in public health, you have a greater calling to help people, and you think more globally. You think more global security-ish. You think more helping people regardless of their backgrounds. I mean, I would put a lot of public health people right on par with doctors, and they do no harm, right? That's your kind of mantra. So you're not, if it comes down to 100,000 people are going to die because of an epidemic, or we're going to save 10 people in the United States, I would guess, I can't say this, but most public health people would lean towards saying, well, we got to help 100,000 people because that's what we have to do. And I think the reality is, and you might not like this answer, but I think we need both. Like, we need people who are soldiers and then think, oh no, we saved the United States, that's what we do, because they protect us and they think like that. But we also need the other side where they're like, we have to save as many people as we can because we're all humans and we live on this planet together, right? And hopefully it boils down to policy, and we hope that the people that we elect, that they're at the highest echelons of government, can make that kind of discernment when they need to on the right side of whatever. So, wow.
Another one is, thanks so much for presenting on such an interesting topic. As someone who has just started doing medical related research and is still learning about the distinction between medicine and public health, I'm wondering if you think there may be a distinction between medical intelligence and public health intelligence, or do you see the two as interchangeable?
I think, and I have to thank you, because giving this presentation has really helped clarify my thoughts a little bit. And I'm really starting to think that, it's kind of, there's some parallels here from the way the FBI and the CIA used to work. And especially before 9/11. I recommend a great book. It's called Wedge. It was written before 9/11, and it talks about the infighting between the FBI and the CIA over the years since 1950 to 1990. And there really was this kind of wall. And even though CIA might gather some intelligence and information, they weren't pitching it over to, and I'm talking about traditional intelligence work now, not medical intelligence, but the CIA would just hold this information and they wouldn't punt it over. And the FBI was doing the same thing. And we were on the same team, so we're not sharing. However, I see that after 9/11, it's not perfect by any stretch, but it's certainly working much smoother. And I think you're going to see the same thing with public health and intelligence and medical intelligence. And right now I'm using the term medical intelligence as a national security thing, and public health intelligence as a public health thing. And right now they're kind of distinct. I can see people drawing lines saying, I'm not helping the other side because they're not going to do the right thing with it. But over time, and I don't have a crystal ball, but if I had to guess, something bad is going to happen, right? Because that's when the government like 9/11 that happened. And that's when the government goes, wow, the system's broken. We got to fix it. And they try to fix it. And I bet that's kind of what will happen is we'll have some sort of public health emergency that, you know, and it could be 5 years, 10 years, could be 50 years down the road. And the military might have had that information and didn't share it. And then Congress is going to be like, right, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of my crystal ball on that.
Unfortunately, I think you're right, but hopefully any disaster like that is not going to happen anytime soon.
Well, I'm an intelligent professional, so I am traditionally pessimistic, right? That's my job.
So Gene had to log off, but he said, we approach our healthcare critical infrastructure protection from an all hazards approach. Is that too simplistic?
I wouldn't use the word simplistic. I think it's too general. You actually need to be more specific, I think. And I mean, this is getting beyond the discussion of medical intelligence, but I think and this kind of goes a little bit to what Chris was saying, we have to protect critical infrastructure. And I think that's a little akin to saying, well, we just have to protect the United States. Okay, how do you do that? Are you talking about NORAD? Are you talking about border security? Are you talking about, you know, somebody putting a nuclear bomb in a boat and bringing it over? Like, there's all of these threats. So we need to be more specific as opposed to more simplistic or general. I don't ask me to solve that one because that's not going to happen.
Well, if you're going to use the example of a nuke on a boat, maybe you should stop calling the Coast Guard so squishy.
I say this all I was in the
Well
Air Force for
played.
5 years. My son defied me and joined the Navy. I don't know what's up with that. But anyway.
So that is the last question in the chat. Does anybody have any more? Does anybody want to unmute and ask one? Chris, is your hand still up from before, or did you have another one?
Oh. Zoom faux pas.
No, I forgot to take it down.
No problem. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anyone. Oh, hold on. I have another. Oh, I got a number of thanks for the great discussion.
Well, I appreciate it. Like I said, I think it probably helped me more than it helped you because I really clarified some of my thoughts. Those were some great questions. Hopefully Jennifer and I can do something with this and turn it into a paper. But you know, I appreciate you having me. And you know, if you're ever over in the American Military University land, look me up. I'll say hi.
Well, thank you so much for giving up your Wednesday night, especially I know how busy you are right now with hurricane-related things on top of everything else. So we really appreciate your time.
All right. Well, good luck, everybody. Stay in touch. Oh, I should do this just in case. Jennifer has my email address, but I'll drop it in the chat. If anybody needs anything or wants to follow up or tell me I was a knucklehead or I was full of garbage, feel free to reach out to me. But Jennifer, she's got my contact information.
Well, thank you again. We really appreciate your time tonight.
All right, everybody. Have a great night. We'll talk to you later.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month or next week at our IAEM meeting.